Webinar series. Today we will be going over test automation, optimizing your return on investment. My name is Brian Murphy. I'm the marketing coordinator here at DISYS. Real quick, I'd like to run through what we're going to do with questions. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, just write them down in the question box. If they're current and relevant to the slide at hand, I'll try to get our speaker Dave to address them. I'll find an appropriate time to jump in. Otherwise, if they're kind of broad and more conceptual, we'll wait to the end. We'll have a 10 to 15 minute period at the end of Q&A where Dave will answer any questions you have. You can also answer questions at the end, and Dave will go through those. I'm joined today by Dave Safrinko. Dave is a certified Scrum Master, Agile Coach, and is ISTQB Quality Assurance and Test Engineer. He's been doing IT management for over 30 years and has designed and implemented multiple testing centers of excellence for Fortune 500 companies. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and turn over the floor to David.
All right, thanks, Brian. Again, very quickly, yes, I'm Dave Safrinko. I do run the testing and agile practice, training and transformation here at DISYS. And as I visit multiple clients around the country, a few themes around testing always come to bear. The top one is test automation, how companies can actually get better at what they do from a code quality perspective, as well as from a cost efficiencies on doing things, leveraging an automation strategy versus a typical manual type effort. And the second one is really around agile and agile development as it relates to test automation, where people are trying to implement an agile strategy coupled with their agile development and how it all interrelates from a test automation perspective. So today we're really going to focus on our automation framework, quickly going over what is automation, our package utilization, so focusing on the tools that we use when we create our framework, the architectural design, and of course our automation approach to projects. First and foremost, what is test automation? Again, the main driving factor is that to reduce the overall testing cost and increases the speed to market by reducing test cycle time. And again, from a regression standpoint, automation, it's really applicable to your either new functionality or new deployment. Direct benefits, of course, reducing the overall execution effort by 50%, shorten test life cycle durations up to 75%. And one of the key factors is that it redirects those QA resources to more critical or more strategic testing activities that they're not sitting during the regression test cycle times and manually executing tests over and over and over again. From an automation perspective, they could be doing additional work on the next project or again, more strategic type effort. Indirect benefits, of course, reduce testing costs for future releases of maintenance. Increased test coverage without increasing FTE or test duration. Again, leveraging an automation framework, you can do much more, especially from a data permutation or a variation of data where you can execute tests, to cover all your variables. Reduce data management costs by automated test data creation. As everyone's aware, you can create all the tests in the world. However, if you don't have a corresponding test data to drive those tests, you're really not leverage or getting the entire benefit out of your test automation strategy. And of course, supporting testing requirements across multiple environments. So again, in today's environment, whether you are working from a mobile standpoint, iPad standpoint, to Unix, Linux, Windows, all those things, if you're creating products, being able to test across all those platforms, test automation will certainly give you some great ROI to ensure that you're not creating multiple test suites, that you can actually customize your existing test suite to run across those multiple environments. Success factors, again, strategy on what that is. Implementing a test automation can be a challenging task. And again, these success factors are really what the QA team or the automation team is going to ask themselves. Determining what should be automated. Not everything from your application standpoint needs to be automated or should be automated. Again, how is test automation integrated to the overall big picture? How it aligns with the SDLC and your development actions that are respective to your automation efforts. Again, identifying some of the pitfalls. The second block is really how do I measure the actual benefits of automation? There is a initial setup cost to go ahead and automate. Secondly, ask this all the time, what is the best tool? There's many tools out there, and depending upon your architecture, infrastructure, your application, what the underlying languages are, is selecting the best tool. And of course, especially from the advent of Agile, how do we organize our QA group to support automation? And then down in the bottom one, the skill sets required, expected ROI, and the impact of the overall test automation tool have on everything above. And as I are aware, as we get further and further into Agile, which does require a certain skill set from an automation standpoint, where a traditional manual tester may not have the exact skill sets to automate. That's something we encounter all the time, and how we could bridge that gap, as well as, again, as we get into the presentation, the methods we employ, whether we're testing at an API level or testing at a GUI level, will certainly drive the different skill sets that are required, which of course will all go into, the actual benefits and, what is the initial cost to set up a robust automation framework, then again balancing that over your ROI. So selecting the right opportunity, again, very major consideration when you're going to say whether a particular application needs to be automated, or do I actually initiate an automation strategy. So again, identifying, prioritizing, and estimating the ROI for automation candidates is a critical process, and again, must be performed on an ongoing basis. So here we have just a few graphics here with 3 applications, and we're looking at that high-level cost-benefit factors. Determining whatever level of test cycles and execution repetition is certainly a factor on whether to automate. Of course, stability of the functionality, can it be scaled, need for data creation, all these considerations when you are creating an automation strategy need to be considered before you come to an actual ROI and the optimization of your testing effort. On the right side, you can see after we selected a particular application, we do the cost benefits analysis. Again, from the tools and licensing, do you have the right tools, or do you have to purchase tools? Script development and testing, again, typically these skill sets are a little bit more development focused versus manual testing focused. And of course, creating your automation framework, the maintenance that's involved with that. So as everyone understands, when we do regression tests, it's usually due to a new feature, function, or delivery, and you would have to maintain those scripts, either going in and recoding or modifying or refactoring that automation code itself. So all these got to be considered in there. And of course, the execution, how long it's going to take that once you have the entire suite automated, what is the duration, what is the time saving. And of course, the benefits is reduced production defects, because we are now, again, leveraging automation will allow us to test more thoroughly. And again, back to that data permutations again, as well as reduced manual execution, really under time constraints, which we all seem to have when we get to a testing cycle. Following the risk-based approach, leveraging the automation will get you much further along to ensure your 100% coverage is what ideally you're shooting for before you go out to production. It's also important to note when I say production defects from an automation standpoint, our strategy always includes negative and positive testing, along with the standard equivalence partitioning, boundary analysis, those type things that are pretty standard within an automation scope. So after we do all that particular due diligence in identifying an opportunity, we do go through a test case feasibility analysis, to help us identify the overall effort and select the best candidate. So you can see in this particular page here, we have multiple sources and different analysis we take, from a technical analysis, what percentage of the screens, down to the complexity, how complex a particular application, versus simple, medium, complex is how we actually do it. Stability of the application, again, we don't want to automate too soon. We don't want to automate too late. It's really coming in with a balance when we're pretty much assured that the code is in a frozen type state. From a feasibility analysis, again, test data very critical to drive the test, depending on what what framework you are going to employ. But again, without that test data to drive the script, you're not going to gain a lot of the ROI we expect to gain. Script reusability. Again, anything we focus or going forward needs to be focused on reusable components, especially from an application standpoint. You don't want to continually script your logon component. You would create one logon component and reuse it for all your scripts, either as a global variable or by a simple call method. Application size, and again, multiple environments, which we already discussed around multiple operating systems or leveraging a mobile application. And then from that feasibility analysis, taking in those defining factors of the analysis, complexity, stability, data, reusability, size, and environments, we come up with a weighting and a rating, and typically we can go ahead and group those into not suitable or a form of proof of concept before you invest heavily in it to make sure your strategy is going to work. And of course, greater than 70 is good automation candidates. So all this analysis is done up front before we start to construct a framework or purchase or buy or use an existing framework. Again, following the right opportunity, doing some analysis will help you not only narrow your focus to get you the most ROI from your automation effort, but also will give you the code quality you're looking for as an adjunct to the overall reduce time, speed to market type attributes that we're looking to gain from your automation. From an SDLC integration, so integrating the development process into the SDLC is critical to ensure automation is planned up front and scripts are efficiently maintained through the application's lifetime. So again, this is very critical, especially what you're going to see to take the automation effort even very early on into your planning, into your master test plans, allowing for all that time and effort to do the automation. This is also very critical to ensure that the development team allows for hooks, various hooks that the screens themselves can be automated. A lot of instances, which we found over the past few years, most scripting works by looking at the underlying object codes. Well, if those object codes and classes change names through development actions, it essentially breaks your script. Or if you run it through a Citrix box, you don't even have visibility with object codes. So understanding the feasibility of automation needs to take place and plan early on in the requirements phase and the design phase to ensure that whatever development IDEs they're using or the architecture of the application they're developing allows for an automation to happen. Down in the management and support the development process, one thing unique about DISYS in particular that I've employed now for 15 years is we have business analysts assigned to our testing center, as well as automation specialists, which are developers. And we have developers that correspond to the application. So if it's a Java app, we have Java developers. If it's a Windows, we have C# or .NET developers. The business analyst is a key role because our first phase for all testing, as we're aware, is to validate that the requirements are testable and measurable. Our business analysts really take the lead on that. Not only do they understand the domain in which we are going to test, but they also assist with creating business process models, which gives a very visual, holistic view of the application under test. So from a testing perspective, we can really understand the entire application from beginning to end. And of course, we do employ quality control gates, which correspond to, if you're a PMI shop, to the PMI concept planning execution. From a development perspective, again, we do leverage those business analysts as our key focal point person that work with development to ensure no ambiguous requirements, to ensure that our test cases are validated. Again, just to ensure everyone is on track, that business analyst plays a key role with us in our testing center. course, with the test lead and the automation specialist who is overall, again, responsible for doing the automation. And then again, entry-exit criteria, again, very typical in a testing environment. We follow entry-exit criteria, and from the design to the development to the test and sign-off, again, getting approval of our test cases, how our approach, our test plan, all done up front, coordinated by the business analyst and the project team, ensure everyone's integrated, and we level set and set expectations. And of course, from a maintenance standpoint, just due to change management or defect management, we always have those personnel available to act, react, or be proactive in ensuring our scripts are always up to date and maintained, so they could, assure those production behaviors in the test environment. Of course, during the whole cycle, we will create your defect management. We can continue to estimate the ROI due to changes. We do have development standards, the knowledge transfer process, and the team support. Again, really a one-stop shop that needs to be all-inclusive of automation strategy as we move forward. So again, integration into the SDLC is very critical in defining this automation strategy. Really, essentially we are developers and working with the development team, and from an actual development standpoint, goes a long way to ensure what our strategy does will indeed support the application of the test. Sample criteria. So again, we mentioned entry-exit criteria. Typically in a test environment, that's from requirements to design, requirements traceability, zero defects. We actually have the entry criteria for automation as well. And again, these are some of the key questions we're going to be asking ourselves. Do we have the key resources identified? Again, communications point for automation team regarding requirements, data, sign-off, and training. Again, typically, from an automation standpoint, these will be developers. Has the data strategy been clearly defined? Again, I mentioned that a few times. The scripts are always data hungry. Having that corresponding respective data conditioned and meet all the criteria that are outlined in the requirements or user stories, do we have that data available to execute on our automation strategy? Of course, identify scripts that consume data versus that can reuse data. Typically, which is another case for leveraging business process models, the output of one component is the input for another, and running those from an end-to-end perspective and then automating the entire process end-to-end is really ideally what you'd want to shoot for from an automation strategy. And of course, integrating data steps in data creation steps in the automated scripts creates unnecessary dependencies. Third question, of course, have test cases been clearly written and validated? Typically, your manual testers working with the BA will create the manual test cases step by step, which in then turn is turned over to your automation team to go ahead and automate those test cases. And of course, is there a stable automation development and testing environment? Testing or an automated testing environment, again, is ideal, not always practical. But as you know, working with automation, we're going to be executing many scripts. Could be hundreds, could be thousands, and having a dedicated environment to do that is again ideal. From an agile perspective, again, depending on if you have a continuous integration strategy, having that separate environment, and it can be virtualized, will go a long way to ensure that this automation suite can be executed non-stop, continually execute to give you back that continuous feedback loop. So typically there are two approaches to automation framework. One is code-driven testing, and one is the GUI interface. Most people are familiar with the GUI interface. It's nothing more than screen scraping. If you play it to a website, it's looking at those websites, and anything from a user interface is what that approach is. Typically, this is a record playback type using the tools such as Quality Center or Selenium or one of the other tools. But the efficiencies and more prevalent now coming is code-driven testing, where we're actually testing at the API level. So again, using classes, modules, and libraries that are tested at a variety of input arguments is much more efficient than trying to do all your testing or automation regression testing from a GUI type interface testing. But again, the testing framework provides a basis of the automation and simplifies the overall effort. In most cases, you're probably going to leverage both of these, but I would say 80 to 90% of your automation testing are at the code-driven level or at the API level versus the GUI-based level. There are 3 common frameworks that we use in test automation: data-driven, modularity, and keyword-driven. So again, data-driven, heavy data consumption. It's really whatever input from a data perspective drives the behavior of the automation. So again, it goes back to your permutations of data, how many inputs, drop-down lists, all that stuff, depending upon what data is selected or what data is passed, the automation would react to that particular data set and execute that test. Modularity is a little bit different, where we actually create a module that represents module sections, third-party interfaces. More recently, we can create modules in SAP or Oracle, PeopleSoft that would do that simulation. It kind of works like stubbing out records, but it's a little bit more robust. And keyword-driven testing, again, a good example of this is back to that logon component. We typically would create a logon test in our repository, and underneath that logon, we would create all the individual tests that would test every function within that logon component. But from a testing or a script perspective, it would be nothing more than a call method that would say call keyword. It would go out, and under that keyword repository, it would execute all those tests underneath it. So it's a good way to streamline your testing efforts and keeping your script clean, as well as if there's changes, you would not need to modify your actual script. You would modify the keyword repository, make it much cleaner, quicker, and more efficient. Then, of course, there's a hybrid. So one testing approach, one testing framework does not fit all. You'll find that it may be a group of all 3, in which we term the hybrid testing. So our approach really accommodates the keyword, the modularity, and the data-driven testing. Again, it's just more flexible, and again, you don't want to make any particular framework work for your application. You want to leverage the best and most efficient, and if that means leveraging multiple frameworks, then that's what you should do. And again, it allows data-driven scripts to take advantage of libraries. Utilities can make data-driven scripts more compact and less prone to failure. And of course, you can use the scripts to perform tasks that may be too difficult to implement in a pure keyword fashion or approach. So it's really a hybrid. There is not one size fits all. That's when we go into different clients. We will look at what they're trying to do and come up with a framework and an approach that's tailored to them. And although we don't go in and say we can only do one particular keyword data or modularity, it really depends on what they're trying to accomplish, their goals and objectives. We would tailor our approach to meet their needs. Accelerators, well, again, the automation framework does provide benefits over a standard automation tool. We leverage heavily at DISYS Accelerators. And again, down the bottom right, you see in the purest form, it just works in conjunction with the script. It really drives the script and provides the functionality for creating and maintaining automated scripts. And of course, it bridges the gap between code and code-free by way of keywords and GUIs. So we actually leverage multiple accelerators. The first one is the process modeler, and you can see the picture on the right. What we're able to do in our framework is we refer back to our business analysts in creating these business process models. Some people may remember old UML, BPML, which is your business process modeling language. We even streamlined it a little bit further to make it very user-friendly, that we leverage Microsoft Visio, and we create these business process models end-to-end, doing all the decision trees, inputs, outputs. What our framework does is embed those Visio documents up into our IDE there. And of course, right-clicking on those components, we can go ahead and identify the attributes of that. What's really unique about our framework is once this is complete, we can automatically generate the test cases. So it's a very minimal need for manual testers. In one particular example, we had 15 to 20. We actually were able to reduce our manual testers down to 3. And then this automation framework will go ahead and build all of those test cases for us. The second accelerator is our data validation. This one here allows us to create business rules for each one of those components. So if you get back to your if, then, else statements, this particular accelerator will create those for us. You can see there's a one-to-one, one-to-many relationship. What's also unique about this, again, keeping user-friendly, is it will automatically generate the SQL queries for us. So if you do have manual testers available, they do not need to know the syntax or how to create SQL statements. This particular accelerator will generate them for us, and it's just a matter of them executing those SQL statements to pull back the corresponding data. Data Explorer, again, we talked many times about this. This is nothing more than connecting to the various data sources and selecting your test criteria, the data that's required to drive those scripts. It also allows us to condition that data. So if we pull this data from production or test, not only is it capable of scrubbing that data to make it SOX or HIPAA compliant, but what it allows us to do is condition that data to force error routines or to force certain conditions that may not be in production. So again, it's a very powerful tool. Because it's so powerful and because we're so dependent upon data, this is also a desktop that allows to do this, a web interface that the testers can go in and pull the corresponding data. What's also unique about this is what you'll find is once a particular tester selects data, it locks that record so no other tester can come behind and do data mining and change that data that our tests were written against. So again, very powerful, but again, once we tie this back to our automation script and strategy, it really works from an end-to-end perspective. And it's really comprehensive that it pulls the data, the business rules, and of course the end-to-end perspective. One thing kind of unique, and we're actually quite proud of this, is we are one of the few that I know that can actually automate mainframes. So what we're looking at here is a copybook. So for those businesses, companies, industries that are heavily mainframe dependent, we do have the capabilities by virtue of using File8 and Easy Trees to pull that DSAM or DSAM for a non-relational or, of course, relational is not an issue. We can pull that into our framework and automate against the copybook. So that's quite unique for those who are mainframe centric. We have the capability by leveraging our data load accelerator to automate mainframe applications. So if you look back at the multiple approaches at the top, the record and playback, which is very typical, and as everyone understands, whether using QTP, Selenium, or any of the record and playback, it works half the time and has a hard time needing drop downs and pick lists. It requires some custom coding. Selenium is require a Java guy, and QTP it require a VB script guy. Modularity, you can see we just color coded it. And we look at each one of the approaches that from a complexity, flexibility, scalability, reusability, maintainability, and of course, development skill set, which is critical to do this. And we just rate these from a good, bad, and fair from a candidate selection on what is the best approach to take. And again, it does vary amongst your organization, your infrastructure, and of course, your application. Package utilization. These next screens are all built upon Quality Center. However, we do support Selenium as well as TFS. Those seem to be the market leaders as I go around and look. However, as you are aware, there are many testing tools out there. But we do leverage at DISYS ALM, which is the latest and greatest. On top of that, we do leverage QuickTest Pro. And of course, the launcher, the execution, the metric measures, all of our dashboards all built within Visual Studio and housed on IIS. And you can see the whole architectural design, every test case management, the test lab, the requirements traceability, all contained within Quality Center. Quick Test Pro would be our tool used for automation from a reporting standpoint, automation integration. We do leverage Visual Studio and IIS. Certain aspects of this, again, we can execute as a test or a test set, even using development mode or standalone. Much gives you the capability to debug your automation script. And again, so we try to make it user-friendly as far as sending it back to a particular client, or if the client wants to leverage this, they do not need the skill sets. So everything here is able to be executed right out of QC. Selenium, again, some of the other third-party tools that are out there. And of course, the scheduler gives the automation to execute on a remote or virtual machine during off hours. A typical project approach, again, we employ business analysts, although most organizations have business analysts that may be tied to the business or the development. We just happen to be unique that I actually bring the business analyst under QA as well. So this is from a regression standpoint, automation standpoint. We would do reviews of existing test cases and process models if they exist. We would perform a risk analysis. So again, getting back to, is it the right opportunity? Is it the right, is it a good automation candidate? We run through a risk analysis, which I believe the next slide will tell you how we complete that. We do identify those critical paths, whether it's a risk-based indicator, a critical operating issue, or a key process area. We do identify all of those within our test management tool. And then, of course, we do review all test cases for those that developers or business would want a little bit more attention if it did not meet the candidacy for an automation, that we can always go back and we get that input from the various stakeholders. Automation process, again, configuring Quality Center, installing the framework, and doing that prioritization, creating the test data strategy. From a development perspective, configuring the test lab, the object repository, components, and select the automated test based upon that risk-based analysis. And of course, we do get the validate and sign off to ensure, again, level setting expectations on what is and what isn't automated and tested. And of course, generate all the artifacts. One thing unique, again, about our automation framework now, just reminded me, is as we go through our automation script, we actually take JPEGs of every validation point, and we attach those to the overall summary, so we can always go back at any given time and have your proof or audit, if you're governed through audit, federal, state type things, to prove that we did indeed test it, and these were the corresponding results, that it did meet objectives or meet requirements or did not. Of course, during the project, again, back to the defect management, updating test cases, executing the regression test suite, and of course, having that need support. When we do a risk-based approach, there's many ways. Over in the right, in the highlighted blue column, this is what we generally go through to determine whether it's an automation candidate or not. And we base it on these 5 criterion: frequency of usage of functions, the complexity or probability of failure is high, components or systems with 3 or more integration points, whether they're internal or external, components, systems, or business process models identified as a critical operating issue. How we define that critical operating issue is if a particular feature or capability is broken in production and it warrants a severity 1 or 2 defect status, we select as an automation candidate, just due to the nature of the critical process that it is covering. Then, of course, anything having a internal or external governance, such as anti-money laundering, SOX, HIPAA, audit governance, again, internal, external. Those items are also flagged in this particular case QC as the automatic candidate for automation, which will then go ahead and do our analysis on the feasibility and whether we are going to automate it or not. DISYS is a typical risk-based approach that we employ with all of our applications to ensure we are testing the right things, the most critical functions, and again, anything from a governance perspective. During time constraints or during regression cycles, our clients can be assured that we are testing the most critical functions before going into production. I just wanted to highlight one more thing on business process modeling. I think everyone's seen what a process model looks like. The key here is it is end-to-end, and it does follow all paths. We also employ negative and positive testing, and really it allows the QA engineers to look at the entire system from an end-to-end perspective, to see all the integration points, interoperability, third-party interfaces. It also, believe it or not, when we create these and present them back to the line of business or the marketing, whoever generated the requirements, they're also surprised how much clearer and they really understand the complexities of what they're building. And I find it's much easier looking at a visual than it is to look through a 50-page Word document or multiple Word documents. By simply creating the business process models, it gives you a much clearer picture of what you are developing and testing. Most importantly, again, here, it's the data and control path. So we know exactly what data is being passed between components. And again, coupled with our framework, it enables the automated test case generation capabilities, or again, minimizes the need for manual testers, but it improves the overall thoroughness of the testing by following the 100% path coverage, and then couple that with all data permutations. Again, we're back to the code quality perspective. This is a business case that we created probably a month ago. Again, this is valid. From a manual, actually up on the top right, I'm looking now, you can see we did break these down on scale, simple, medium, complex, how long it would take in minutes, and how many test cases per day from an automation and manual standpoint. Then in the upper right, you can see this particular company was taking 22 days to do their regression test at a cost of $76,000. After we automated it, we got that down to 5 days at a cost of $13,000. And of course, the cost analysis down the bottom says after their nine and a half regression cycle, they actually broke even on their initial investment. So I know I went through that quick. We have like 20 minutes for questions, comments. Brian, anything on the?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and type them into the question box now. We've had a couple come in, but if you want Dave to answer anything, just go ahead and type it in the question box, and I will address that. First question, Dave. This is on QA processes. So, are there custom-built solutions for defining QA processes, or is it just typically one, all the same?
I'm not sure what you mean by custom built. I mean, the QA process itself, again, my background's all CMM. CMM has a thing of 22 key process areas. Doesn't mean we need to use all of those. So when we go in and do any kind of working with clients or the clients themselves, they need to tailor that to what meets their needs and value add. Anything that isn't value add needs to be dropped. We just don't do things for the sake of doing things to fill a block. So there's many. I would say there's not a standard approach to any of this. This is our approach, what works best, that we've done over really between me and my team over the last literally 20 years and got to this what works well. And being able to tailor this approach to various clients and industries, we come up with something that's very agreeable with the clients to ensure, again, it's all about receiving ROI, increasing productivity, increasing code quality, and of course, speed to market. So there's not a standard approach. We actually tailor it to the needs of the business.
Okay. There's another question coming in here. Once again, if you have a question, just go ahead and type it in the box, and I will read it out loud. Just a second, Dave. Someone typed in that they have a question. I'm just waiting for them to get it in.
Okay.
So what is considered a bad automation candidate regarding ROI? Oh, sorry, nope. Forget the last part. What is considered a bad automation candidate?
I would say one where there's no repetition. It's going to be a one-time use, so you're not going to spend a lot of effort on automating something that typically it's a one-time run through. I mean, let's say like static content management type. Other ones could be where back to the repetition. Particular ones where it's very simple, I would say in nature, where again back to the risk-based approach, the probability of finding a defect is low. So you would spend your time more on more complex or more features or functions that have a higher capability. Ones that are, again, you're at a high percentage level that you're never going to drive a defect out of it. You wouldn't automate as well. You really want to take that effort and your whole all your resources and apply it on a thing that, again, back to the bang for the buck. Let's automate something that has a high probability of failure, heavy repetition, lots of data variables, and stay away from things that don't meet that criteria because, again, you're just automating for the sake of automating without any expectations of finding defects or repetitions.
Okay. Another question. Our existing test automation is heavily weighed toward GUI testing. How can we work toward doing more code-based automated tests?
There's multiple answers there. Again, I mentioned, I think earlier on, we're probably 85% API level. That requires a certain skill set. So one, I've answered in a couple of ways. One is you have to hire a person that's capable of automating from an API level that understands the code and what your application is written. Secondly, GUI interface testing, virtual screen scraping, and all that stuff is not very efficient. Typically we would do 1 or 2 times through to validate that the GUI itself meets the requirements, that has the appropriate whatever that you're looking for. From that point on, the focus should be on the API. First part I would do to do that is make a commitment to doing that, but you have to come in with the corresponding skill set to do that. Not saying they're not out there, but a typical manual QA guy cannot create API tests, or they would need some additional training to understand the development language to create those and test at the API level. So it's getting that corresponding skill set in your approach where, essentially you're going to be writing code versus using a tool to go ahead and do screen scrapes from a particular GUI interface. It even becomes more complex if you're, again, back to AIX, game of leveraging AIX or mainframes where now you're using a TN type module that you're trying to screen scrape green screen. So, there's a couple of variables in there, but the most important one is having the correct skill set in which they could actually do that API level testing. Another way of, if we're talking GUIs, I'm associating that with websites. Leveraging other tools like SOAP UI is very simple. SOAP UI is a good tool for doing some of that testing where, a manual tester can probably handle that. And again, it's not that I'm discounting this, it's just that in today's, what I see, especially with the advent of Agile, most QA people are we're now turning to development features and capabilities simply because that skill set's needed to become more efficient from the automation standpoint.
Okay. Next question. What are the parameters you have considered while calculating ROI?
So if we go back to that screen.
Yeah, I think that was a request to go back to the slide as well.
So we have, again, this is for a particular application that we all have experience in there. So breaking it down, and you can see sales and service and teller, the banking application. So we understood, getting back to the business process model, to identify the data required, the permutations of data, the complexities of the process model itself from beginning to end, whether there's any interfaces, third party, internal, external. Is there a mainframe component? Is there a batch cycle? So all those things, for understanding the domain, we were able to determine, of course by experience again, whether a particular, and these are all risk-based approach, by the way, each one of those risk-based approach requirements were simple, medium, and complex based upon those attributes of business process that we're trying to implement. From that, and again, these are real numbers from an actual client. They gave us the numbers in minutes, how long it would take to do the simple, medium, complex versus us to automate it. And then it's just a simple matter of multiplication. On the other side, when we came up with the actual calculation, it was really by virtue of leveraging our accelerators that we didn't have to do data mining, attaching the data to our scripts, being able to execute, you can see 120 the simple, 80, so on and so forth. We took that 22 days from a manual perspective and executing them all from an automation perspective, so we were able to get it to 5. The cost figures was based upon what it cost them their existing FTE, the hourly rate times how many hours per day times 22 days. And ours was based essentially on the same thing. Taking how many audits, in this particular case, it's 3 automators to execute, re-execute, do the batch cycle. We've got that down to 5. So it was really domain-driven, identifying the simple, medium complexities based upon the business process models. But again, back to how much data, the data permutations, the environment variables, those type of things.
Okay. Real quick, I think there is a different slide that he was referring to specifically. I'm going to move on to another question, then go back. What was the name of the software to write scripts made by HP?
QTP, Quick Test Pro.
Okay. Let me see if a follow-up came through. Can you go back to the chart with, it's an execution chart, a couple slides back from where you are now?
I don't have an execution chart. This? No. This?
We may need to just move. We may need to just move on. We will send out a copy of the presentation, and any questions that you want Dave to address, we can do so via email as well. So we can get to that question later. Last question I have in, are there any technologies that do not automate well?
I wouldn't say automate. That's very subjective. I would say most people are having issues with mobile, and it's not that they're not being capable of automating well, that there's a lot of tools out there claiming they can do automation on mobile apps, phones, Android, iOS, and selecting the right tool. I can tell you in my last 2 engagements, what the clients end up doing is people need to be aware they can go out to Apple and they can go out to Google and download the SDKs and automate everything without an additional tool. Other people are using some of the main tools that are out there, but there's pros and cons with each one of them, especially cost. Some of the more popular ones do not give you the source code, so you can't do any customization. And again, so people are, again, still testing the waters from a mobile standpoint. I don't know of any tool that application that we've encountered that we couldn't automate, with the exception of Citrix. When you run through a Citrix box, essentially you do not have access to the underlying objects of the application. And all scripting works off of understanding to objects. And without having that visibility running through a Citrix box, it's very hard to automate. Other than that, I can't think of anything that doesn't have some capability to automate. And I think overall, mobile seems to be the most frustrating because there's just too many tools out there. And I don't think there's a leader out there that I can say, you know, is what people are using. In fact, again, my last two clients are actually downloaded the SDK from Apple and Google, and they're just custom coding it.
Okay. What would be the best automation software for mainframe testing?
For mainframe, there really isn't one. So a mainframe's a little unique. Well, it depends. One is if the mainframe is using DSAM files, which is a non-relational, you would have to use FileLead and EasyTree. Those are the only two tools I know of, and there may be others, but those two primarily, they're CompuWare products. The only two products I believe CompuWare kept that allows us to do data extraction, data testing by using FileLead and EasyTree files. Other than that, you're back to the emulators, the TN370s, 390 emulators that are your typical green screens again. Typically there, what you're going to do is do screen scraping, which is very tedious in nature, which is what we faced in this particular area, and our solution was to use FileLead and EasyTree to take all those DSAM files and put them into a relational database, whether it's Oracle, SQL, DB2, and do all the testing based upon the relational side. And of course, you can always put that data back leveraging EasyTree and FileLead again. So from a mainframe perspective, outside of FileLead and EasyTree, with a strategy to port all that test data into a relational database, there's really not an easy tool out there that you may have to resort to against screen scraping from the green screen.
Okay, and then last one. Can you explain how test cases are categorized as simple, medium, and complex?
Well, again, it's based upon the overall process. So again, something simple could be back to a logon component. Something, I actually have a chart. It's not particularly in here. I can send them how we do that, but it's based upon lots of different criteria. I would have to look for it, Brian. So let me send them that particular chart, but it's based upon criteria, based upon the entire business process, how much data is in there, the permutations of data, if there's any interfaces involved, is it pulling data, is it data dependent, complexities, again, back to the interfaces, mainframes. There's multiple things. I do have a whole chart that generates that for me automatically, and I'd be more than happy to send it to them.
Sure. Okay, so that wraps up all of our questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending. One last question. Sorry, David. Any suggestions you can make for batch testing?
Well, batch testing, again, is based upon input-output. So what I typically do is we have all of our daily inputs, whether it's automated or manual. All that stuff at one way, shape, or form is going to go through some kind of a staging directory. I'm not sure what the particular organization calls it. But essentially, it's a consolidation of all the inputs for the day. And then during batch cycle, it's going to suck in all those particular files, process them, and send them to the corresponding databases on the back end. How we handle that is we validate not only at the input to the staging directory, but after the batch cycle goes, we do have some file compares. We do some database validations on the back end to ensure input is what actually was done on the output. A second part of that is after you run your batch cycle, it will produce either a report or another file, and we use that file again and compare it against our input file. So from a efficiency, from a data transaction, running the input files to the staging prior to going into your batch cycle, And then once it gets in through the batch cycle and through the end-of-day processing, we do file compares to each one of those states to ensure that the data was passed appropriately. And then once it does get batch cycled, we go into each one of the corresponding databases after it's parsed and written. We will do a compare again versus our input. So that's the best. That's what we do today. Again, heavily driven. And of course, other tests are the actual features and functionality, which take it from beginning to end through the various components until it gets to that staging directory. So there's multiple validation points there, but in this particular case, it's all based upon the input data. And of course, we keep track of that through the test cases on what data is sent to be processed at the batch cycle. And then, of course, once it's parsed and written out to the database, we will get that final report or file out of the batch process and compare it against our input.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Just to clarify real fast, Dave is the practice manager of our testing and agile services at DISYS. Everything that he has spoken to today, DISYS does provide as a service to its clients. Just to clarify that point, once again, we will be sending out a follow-up email to all of you through GoToWebinar. It'll have instructions on emailing Dave and emailing the marketing department here at DISYS. If you have a request for slides, I'd be more than happy to send them to you. Just go ahead and email marketing department when you get that email, and we'll forward them right back to you. We'll also include a link to a recording of the webinar, so you can go back and see the way that Dave spoke on certain slides, and as well as questions that were asked. So thank you to all of you again for coming. We will be having a webinar next month, and we can send follow-up information. Dave will be doing a part 2, going into a few more key elements in testing and some of the services DISYS does provide. So Dave, thanks again for your time, and thank you everyone for showing up. Is there anything else that you wanted to address?
No, just Brian, I will send this small, medium, complex formula out to you, so that will be available as well.
Yep, I have that noted here, so we will take care of that. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending.
All right, thanks, Brian.